My brothers and sisters, the day Israel struck Qatar, I picked up my phone and called Netanyahu directly. I told him his aircraft had crossed a line, and Africa would not remain silent. When Tel Aviv calculated its operation against Doha, it never calculated on Burkina Faso's fury. Netanyahu believed he could target a sovereign nation without consequence, forgetting that Africa no longer bows to Western, protected powers. Within 6 hours of my condemnation, the Israeli ambassador requested emergency meetings. Within 12 hours, Netanyahu's office was calling African Union headquarters. Within 24 hours, defense contractors were panicking over losing African partnerships worth billions. This was not just about Qatar. It was the moment Africa declared that sovereignty matters everywhere, and those who violate it must face consequences, regardless of American protection. At 3:47 a.m. Doha time, Israeli F-35 jets violated Qatari airspace and launched precision strikes on sovereign territory. No warning, no provocation, no justification beyond Netanyahu's paranoia. They claimed counter-terrorism. They said preemptive defense. They wrapped naked aggression in the language of security, as powerful nations always do. But Qatar is not Gaza. Qatar is not occupied territory. Qatar is a sovereign nation with embassies, international law protections, and the right to exist without Israeli strikes. When I saw smoke over Doha's skyline, I saw Ouagadougou. When I saw Qatari families fleeing, I saw African families. When I heard Netanyahu justify targeting another nation's capital, I knew silence meant complicity. At 4:00 a.m., I called my cabinet and ordered our strongest condemnation. Africa would speak that day. Where Biden expressed concern, I delivered condemnation. Where Europe offered diplomatic solutions, I demanded consequences. Where traditional allies shielded Netanyahu, I exposed him. From the presidential palace, I announced that Burkina Faso condemns Israel's unprovoked aggression against Qatar. But words alone are powerless without action. I immediately suspended all military cooperation with Israel. Training programs canceled, defense contracts terminated, intelligence sharing ended. Within 2 hours, the Israeli ambassador called. "Mr. President, this is a misunderstanding." I replied, "The only misunderstanding is Netanyahu thinking Africa won't defend sovereignty." Tel Aviv quickly realized its miscalculation. African nations control strategic minerals, oil reserves, and crucial voting blocs in international forums. Losing Africa meant isolation. Netanyahu personally called 3 African presidents that same day. Ghana's leader hung up. Nigeria's president refused the call. Kenya's leader listened for 30 seconds, then disconnected. The Israeli Foreign Ministry scrambled, dispatching emergency delegations to Cairo, Abuja, and Nairobi. Defense contractors rushed to calculate the losses from canceled African contracts. APEX began lobbying in panic across Washington. In leaked recordings, Netanyahu demanded answers from his advisors. How did we not anticipate Africa's reaction? They had none. Because they never believed African sovereignty mattered. But my condemnation ignited a continental awakening. Within 24 hours, 15 African leaders issued similar statements. Within 48 hours, the African Union called for emergency sessions. Africa had spoken, and the world was forced to listen. Within 72 hours, African ambassadors were recalled from Tel Aviv. South Africa suspended diplomatic relations. Algeria closed its airspace to Israeli flights. Morocco canceled agricultural partnerships. Nigeria terminated defense contracts. Israel suddenly faced what it feared most: real consequences from nations it could neither intimidate nor control. This is unprecedented. Israeli analysts admitted on live television they were right. For the first time, Israel was confronted with coordinated African diplomatic retaliation. Why did I defend Qatar so strongly? Because Qatar invested in Africa when others ignored us. Qatari sovereign funds built hospitals in Burkina Faso. Qatari companies developed infrastructure across the Sahel. Qatari diplomats treated African leaders as equals. When someone targets your friend, you defend your friend. When someone attacks your partner, you protect your partner. Qatar stood with Africa. Africa stands with Qatar. Israel never understood this principle because it never built genuine partnerships here. Its presence in Africa was transactional, offering military training and surveillance technology in exchange for diplomatic support. Without respect, without trust. Within days, Washington began pressuring African leaders to soften their stance. State Department officials called African capitals. CIA liaisons visited presidents. Economic threats, disguised as polite concerns, flooded diplomatic cables. Burkina Faso's reaction is destabilizing regional security. The U.S. ambassador told me in an emergency meeting, Israel targeting Qatar destabilized regional security. I replied, we are simply responding to destabilization with consequences. American pressure only hardened African resolve. When the hegemon shields the violator, the victims must unite. Realizing their miscalculation, Israel launched desperate diplomatic campaigns across Africa. Emergency aid packages were offered, new partnership proposals presented, old claims of historical friendship repeated. But it was too little, too late. You cannot bomb nations on Monday and expect friendship on Tuesday. Defense Minister Gallant personally flew to 3 African capitals, only to face closed doors. Presidents refused to meet him. Foreign ministers declined appointments. Even airport officials restricted his diplomatic privileges. When never intended to harm Israel-Africa relations. Gallant pleaded to the media. But intentions matter less than actions, and actions always carry consequences. My condemnation echoed far beyond Africa. Arab nations, seeing African solidarity with Qatar, strengthened their own responses. Asian countries reconsidered their silence. Latin American leaders issued condemnations of their own. Israel's assumption of consequence-free aggression collapsed overnight. When Africa leads on sovereignty, the world follows. Regional powers like Turkey and Iran praised African resolve. Africa is showing the world how sovereignty must be defended. Iran's foreign minister declared, the strike on Qatar was meant to showcase Israeli strength and deter its enemies. Instead, it revealed weakness and created new adversaries. Losing Africa's support meant losing crucial UN votes, access to vital minerals, and diplomatic cover. Israeli companies saw contracts worth billions canceled, while diplomats were met with closed doors across 3 continents. In private, Netanyahu admitted, we underestimated Africa's reaction. We treated them like irrelevant observers instead of sovereign equals. It was a strategic miscalculation with generational consequences. Israel gained nothing from targeting Qatar, but lost decades of relationship building in Africa. My brothers and sisters, this moment proved the power of Africa's diplomacy when we stand united. Even with America's military support and Europe's silence, Israel faced consequences when Africa declared enough. We showed the world that sovereignty is non-negotiable, that violations carry costs, and that no nation is beyond accountability, no matter their protectors. Qatar personally thanked Burkina Faso for its leadership. The Arab League invited me to address their emergency session. Non-aligned nations sought African guidance on defending sovereignty. As Africa's moral authority rose, Israel's international standing declined. This is not just about Israel and Qatar. It is about enforcing consequences on any nation that violates sovereignty without justification. Russia learned this in Ukraine. America learned it in Iraq. Now Israel learns it with Qatar. Powerful nations cannot act with impunity when the global South stands united. Africa's condemnation matters because it represents 54 nations, 1.4 billion people, and vast natural resources. Our message was clear. Target our partners, and you face our opposition. Imagine Africa's diplomatic future. When global powers plan operations, they must factor in Africa's response. When nations consider aggression, they must prepare for African consequences. We are no longer silent observers of international affairs. We are active defenders of sovereignty, justice, and international law. And when Netanyahu watches African presidents condemn Israeli actions at the United Nations, he will finally understand what Africa teaches all powers. Actions have consequences, and true friends have defenders. Israel struck Qatar believing Africa would remain indifferent. They were wrong. We cared enough to act, to speak, and to stand for principle over politics. The world is watching as Africa leads on sovereignty. They are learning that moral authority outweighs military might, that justice always finds its voice. Today, Africa's voice said, "Enough" to Israeli violations. Tomorrow, that same voice will defend sovereignty wherever it is threatened.